Life is Strange is a series of video games based around player choice. The choices players are presented with range from trivial, like picking from the breakfast menu at a diner, to tough and heartbreaking, like whether to overdose a terminally ill teenager with painkillers, putting her out of her misery. The multitude of choices undoubtedly increases the replay value of Life is Strange. It also provides the fans with an opportunity to compare, discuss and debate their choices with other players who, presented with the same circumstances, chose differently. The games seem to encourage such discussions by presenting you at the end of each episode with a summary of your choices, along with numbers representing the percentage of players who chose like you and of those who came to a different conclusion. The most polarizing choice in all Life is Strange games to date seems to be the ending choice of Season 1, whether to sacrifice Chloe Price to save the town of Arcadia Bay, or to refuse to do so and let the storm run its course, with 52% of the players choosing to sacrifice Chloe and 48% refusing to do so, a nearly even split. This video is the first in a planned series of 3, each part devoted to analyzing the final choice of Season 1 from a different angle. I'm going to look at the choice in question from 3 perspectives: moral, thematic and personal. By moral, I mean considering what would be the right thing to do if we found ourselves in Max's shoes in that dramatic moment. By thematic, I mean which outcome makes the most sense in the light of themes present in the game and its overall message. By personal, I mean figuring out what Max Caulfield would be most likely to do if we treated her not as an avatar for player decisions, but a person with her own emotions, values and preferences. This video is going to be long, so if you don't want to or don't have the time to listen to it in its entirety, I invite you to take a look at the timestamps in the video description, where you can pick the aspects of the subject matter which interest you the most. One last thing to note before we begin is that I'm going to take the ending choice at face value, as it is presented in the game. I feel the need to stress that because I noticed that some fans, especially the ones arguing in favor of sacrificing Chloe, tend to modify the parameters of the final choice to make their decision more palatable or easier to defend. The most common argument of that kind is saying that Chloe is locked in a kind of final destination scenario where deadly accidents would follow her for the rest of her life, and even if Max refused to sacrifice her, Chloe would die shortly after leaving Arcadia Bay anyway. This argument rests on the assertion that Chloe's continued existence after Max rescued her on Monday is tied to the storm and possible further calamities which would continue to happen until Chloe was finally killed. This argument is not convincing. In fact, it is completely contradicted by what we see in the game. If the coming of the storm is tied to Chloe's life, then why does the storm come anyway after Chloe is murdered by Jefferson in the junkyard? If this really was a final destination kind of situation, then the coming of the storm on Friday would have been prevented by Chloe's murder on Thursday, but it wasn't. The storm is not tied to Chloe's life. It is tied to Max's initial use of her time rewind power on Monday. This becomes evident when we consider that even in the perfect timeline, where Max is featured at an art gallery in San Francisco, the storm still comes on Friday, even though Max used her power only once in that timeline, to rescue Chloe in the bathroom on Monday, after which both Jefferson and Nathan were arrested, leaving Max no further reasons to rewind. So the storm is not tied to Chloe's life, and it is not tied to any subsequent time rewinds by Max. The initial rewind is the sole cause of the storm, which is why undoing it is the only way to stop it. The final destination argument is also completely debunked by Life is Strange Season 2, where Sean can find a photograph of Max and Chloe together in 2017, 4 years after the storm. Both are alive and well. Chloe's stepfather David, who they visit from time to time, doesn't mention tornadoes constantly following them. If you remain unconvinced and you still believe that all the brushes with death Chloe had after Monday were attempts by the universe to correct itself, let me show you what the consequences of that line of reasoning are. That means Jefferson, by murdering Chloe in the junkyard on Thursday, was essentially doing God's work, and it was wrong of Max to oppose him. It means that whatever force or entity was trying to correct the timeline, it used a serial killer to do its dirty work. So it is clearly a force for evil, and Max shouldn't submit to its demands, even if that force or entity threatens to blow up the town unless Chloe is murdered. We shouldn't negotiate with terrorists. Modifications to the final choice could also be made in the other direction. For example, you could say that since Oregon is an area naturally visited by tornadoes, the denizens of Arcadia Bay would have both storm shelters prepared and the wits to use them, thus making the impact of the storm upon the town's population minimal, if any. By modifying the final choice, players are trying to do away with the dilemma and make it so that their preferred choice is the obviously right one. Of course, if Chloe would die violently, no matter what you chose, then the case for sacrificing her becomes stronger, because if she's dead in both cases, then naturally you would choose the option where the town is fine. And conversely, if the destructive impact of the storm was negligible, then there would be zero reason to sacrifice Chloe. Because if the townspeople are fine in both cases, then of course you would choose the option where Chloe is fine too. Such modifications to the final choice are just a way of sidestepping the question, a way not to engage with the dilemma at all. The dilemma is, would you sacrifice your own best friend's life if it was the only way to save a town from a destructive storm? Like I said, I'm going to approach this problem as it is in the game without any modifications. So the parameters of the choice are as follows. Max can use the butterfly photograph to go back from Friday to Monday and undo her rescue of Chloe, thus killing her, but also preventing the storm from ever happening. Or she can refuse to sacrifice Chloe. The storm would proceed, causing catastrophic damage to the town of Arcadia Bay, but Chloe's cruel fate would be broken, and she would be free to live her life without death looming over her. Let's start the moral analysis by stating the obvious. The ending choice of Season 1 is a form of trolley problem. A trolley problem is a type of thought experiment with the following basic parameters. You find yourself near railroad tracks. There is a main track and a side track. There is a trolley coming down the main track. There are people both on the main track and on the side track. The people standing on the track the trolley is traveling down are in mortal danger. You can't stop the trolley or remove people from the track. The only thing you can do is to pull the lever and direct the trolley to the side track, thereby sparing people on the main track but killing those on the side track. Obviously, in the scenario we are analyzing, the trolley is the approaching storm, the town of Arcadia Bay and all its denizens are located on the main track, Chloe finds herself on the side track, and Max can pull the lever to divert the deadly danger from Arcadia Bay towards her best friend by using the photograph to erase her Monday rescue of Chloe. Since the last choice of Season 1 is a trolley problem, I think the moral solution is the same as with all other trolley problems. Do nothing and let things happen. Let me explain. Often, when presented with a trolley problem, people instinctively adopt a utilitarian approach. Utilitarianism is an ethical system which favors actions that decrease the amount of suffering in the world. If there are two people on the main track and only one person on the side track, the utilitarian solution would be to pull the lever, because two deaths would cause more suffering in the world than one. If there is a young person on the main track and an old person on the side track, the utilitarian solution would be to pull the lever, because the young person has more time left to live, so their death would cause more suffering. If there is a person who is a member of a big family on the main track and a lonely person on the side track, the utilitarian solution is once again to pull the lever, because the death of someone who would be missed by many would cause more suffering than the death of someone who wouldn't be missed by anyone.
Nobody would ever even miss your punk ass, would they?
I imagine that most people would be instinctively willing to agree with the first solution. Saving two people instead of one person? That makes sense. But I think, or at least hope, that most people would disagree with the next two examples of the old person and of the lonely person. Who are we to judge who is more worthy of life and whose death would cause more suffering? But realize this: when you consider the quantity of lives at stake, your thought process is exactly the same as when you consider their quality. If you choose to pull the lever in a trolley problem, you have usurped for yourself the right to judge who is more worthy of life. You have usurped for yourself the right to kill the people on the side track, even if it's an entire town on the main track and only one person on the side track. When you pull the lever and direct the trolley to the side track, you kill that one person. The fact that you saved the people on the main track doesn't erase that. Ends do not justify the means. From my point of view, the moral answer to any trolley problem is to do nothing, because no matter how insignificant the life of the person on the side track may seem, nobody has the right to judge them unworthy or less worthy of life and to kill them. To stop the storm, Max would have to kill Chloe. Let's call a spade a spade. She would have to take Chloe from the safety she enjoys on Friday and push her back in front of a barrel of a gun on Monday. To save the town, Max would have to intentionally cause Chloe's death to happen. The death that has already been averted at that point and wouldn't happen again without Max's conscious decision. Imagine seeing someone about to be run over by a car, pulling them to safety, and then pushing them under the next car. Of course, it's being run over by a car that cuts that person's thread of life. But you're the one killing them, since you're the one who chose to push them in front of it. And it doesn't matter, you saved their life a moment ago. That doesn't give you power over their life and death. They do not become your property because of that. While I do believe that generally the outcomes which help the most amount of people should be favored, I also believe that we should look not only at the outcome, but also at the means used to achieve said outcome. And certain means, if they violate fundamental values, are never justified. Using them is always immoral, even if the outcome of such an immoral action would bring benefit to other people. Killing human beings, unless it is done in self-defense or in the defense of others, is never justified. Outside of the narrow exception of defense, it is always an act of evil. Supreme evil, since human life is the greatest value. By defense, I mean using force to repel an ongoing, unlawful attack from a different person directed at us or another person that we are stepping up to defend. On Friday, at the cliff, Chloe, simply by living and breathing, is not engaged in an unlawful attack upon anyone, so killing her would most certainly not be an act of defense, not unless you take all meaning out of that word. A purely utilitarian approach to a trolley problem fails to take into account the substantive difference between letting things happen and actively causing someone's death. The final choice is made not on Monday, but on Friday. On Friday, Chloe is no longer in danger. Max can redirect the mortal danger from the town to Chloe, but it requires her action. On Friday, the natural course of events, which doesn't require any input from Max, is for the storm to hit the town. If you sacrifice Chloe on Friday, you're killing her. You're pushing her back onto the barrel of Nathan's gun. But if Max sacrifices the town, she's only letting things that have been in motion since Monday proceed. She lets them proceed because to stop the storm, she would have to kill someone. Max simply refuses to pay such a high price. Like I said, in my mind, the only moral solution to any trolley problem is to not pull the lever, because by doing so, you kill the people on the side track, which you have absolutely no moral right to do, no matter what's at stake, even if it's one person on the side track and hundreds of people on the main track. In the context of Season 1's final choice, I've seen arguments to the effect that when it's the life of one teenage girl versus an entire town, it's a no-brainer to sacrifice her. Perhaps you, dear listener, are of that opinion. Let me give you some food for thought. The moral standard I just presented, under which it is not permissible to take a human life, even if by doing so you would save other lives, is internally consistent, as moral standards should be. It doesn't matter if sacrificing that one person would save 10 or 100 or 1,000 other people. Under my standard, killing someone is always an act of evil. It is never justified. No matter what situation you apply that standard to, you're going to end up with the same result. Now, is the standard under which it is permissible to sacrifice a lesser amount of human lives to save a greater amount equally as consistent? For many, it's a no-brainer to kill when it's one person versus an entire town. But would you kill one person to save 10 others? Would you kill one person to save 2 others? Would you kill 50 people to save 51 others? If the standard prioritizing the survival of a greater amount of people at the cost of the lives of a lesser amount of people is consistent, then the answer to all the questions I just asked should be affirmative, because the reasoning would be the same in all of those cases. Kill a lesser amount to save a greater amount. But if the answer to at least one of the questions I just asked is negative, then what's the difference? What's the ratio of people being killed to people being saved that makes the killing justified? 10 to 1? 100 to 1? Why that particular number? Wouldn't any number in this context be completely arbitrary? I reject the possibility of putting human lives on the scales and weighing them. I believe that each and every human life carries an infinitely great value. Therefore, even if you attempt to weigh one life against hundreds, the scales are still balanced, because at both scales lie things of equal, infinitely great value. If something can be outweighed, then its value is not infinite. I've already said that in my mind, ends do not justify the means. I genuinely believe that evil means can and do poison a potentially good result. If your goal is to save human lives, and to accomplish that goal you took a human life, then you failed in your stated purpose. Unless your goal was not to protect human lives in general, but to protect a specific set of human lives without regard for others. Utilitarianism, especially when it becomes simplified to the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few, must always be tempered by respect for certain fundamental values like human life and dignity. Utilitarianism, when it is completely unshackled, can be used to justify just about any atrocity as long as the outcome of that atrocity benefits the collective, depriving people of rights, dispossessing them, killing them. All that has been done in the name of benefiting a greater number of people than the number being sacrificed. Let me give you a real-world example. It's the 1930s. The government of the Soviet Union is preparing to eradicate so-called kulaks, a class of land-owning farmers. This upcoming campaign of violence will involve expropriation, imprisonment, and in many cases, murder. The rationale for the planned atrocity is as follows. The kulaks are hogging valuable means of production and resources for themselves: arable land, farming equipment, livestock, grain stocks. By eliminating that social class, all those precious resources would be freed up. Food supply would improve across the country. Poverty and malnourishment would be reduced. In the long term, the positive results of the purge would outweigh its short-term downsides. The lives saved and improved would outnumber the lives lost. Now, of course, I wholeheartedly reject that reasoning, and I would never support a crime like that. And I assume that most people who hold the utilitarian belief that in certain extreme cases human lives may be sacrificed would also condemn the crime I just described. But it's important to consider why we would reject the line of reasoning underpinning that crime. I reject the reasoning used in an attempt to justify the purge against kulaks because in my mind, Killing people for the supposed greater good is never justified, no matter if it's an entire social class or just one person. And no matter what their death would accomplish. I don't even need to listen to the rest of the argument. I don't even need to consider or weigh the supposed benefit it would bring to society. As soon as I hear that human lives would need to be sacrificed, I object. But why would someone utilitarian-minded reject the justification of the Soviet government for the anti-Kulak purge? They might argue that there is insufficient evidence that breaking the economic power of the kulaks would do anything to improve the economic conditions in the country. With the benefit of hindsight, they might point out that the policy of the Soviet government in the 1930s not only didn't improve, but significantly decreased the food supply. And they'd be absolutely right. But here is the difference. I reject the possibility of sacrificing human lives out of hand, even if it would genuinely benefit the rest of society. I don't care. I'm an individualist. I believe certain fundamental rights are inalienable and can never be taken away. Most importantly, the right to life. But someone who permits the sacrifice of human lives cannot reject that line of reasoning out of hand. They are left with a much weaker rebuke. They have to argue the supposed benefits of the proposed sacrifice. Surely, you see the difference between I would never sacrifice a human life, no matter what that would accomplish, and, as a general principle, I allow the sacrifice of human lives for the benefit of others, but in this particular case, I'm not convinced the expected benefit is great enough to justify it. A person holding the former belief can never be persuaded to take another person's life for the greater good. A person holding the latter belief can be persuaded to do so as long as the expected benefit is great enough, as long as the situation is exceptional enough, as long as the stakes are high enough. I firmly believe that no benefit is great enough, no situation is exceptional enough, and no stakes are high enough to sacrifice a human life. Human life is off the table. Under no circumstances can it be violated, no matter what that would serve to accomplish, even if it would save other lives. Because every single life is infinitely precious. You do not sacrifice something infinitely precious ever. There are 3 more aspects of Season 1's final dilemma that need to be addressed. Max's role in causing the storm, the supposed selfishness of saving a friend over strangers, and the fact that it's Chloe herself coming up with the idea of sacrificing her. One could say that the final choice of Season 1 is not a trolley problem because Max, through the use of her power, caused the storm to come. She is therefore responsible for its consequences and has an obligation to prevent it, no matter the cost. This is unlike in a typical trolley problem, where the person faced with the choice to pull the lever or not had no input in creating the dangerous situation they are asked to engage with. Firstly, I dispute the notion that Max is responsible for the storm. Secondly, even if she is, that's all the more reason for her not to sacrifice Chloe. There is an interesting conversation to be had about the origins of the storm. In episode 5, at the beach, Chloe openly floats the idea that it's actually Rachel's revenge against the town that murdered her. And in Before the Storm, it was established that Rachel did have some sort of power associated with the wind. But I acknowledge that the writers of Season 1 most likely intended that it was Max's rescue of Chloe on Monday that unleashed the storm on Friday. But even if we establish that there is a causal link between Max's rewind and the storm, I wholeheartedly dispute the notion that she's responsible for it in any meaningful way. There is a big difference between causing something and being responsible for it. To be held responsible for something, morally or legally, you need to have at least been able to predict the consequences of your actions. You are not, morally, legally, or in any other sense, responsible for the consequences of your actions that were impossible to predict. Imagine the following scenario. You tell your burnt-out friend that they should fly to Hawaii for vacation and to recharge their proverbial batteries. You mean well, but unfortunately their plane happens to crash on the way. Are you responsible for their death? There is a causal link between your actions and their demise, but you are not responsible because that outcome was impossible to predict. Same as the storm. Hell, you'd sooner be held responsible for telling your friend to fly to Hawaii than Max would be for causing the storm, because it is widely known that sometimes planes do crash, and it is most certainly not common knowledge that using a newly found power to save another person's life can cause an unexplainable chain reaction resulting in a tornado. It was impossible for Max to predict that saving Chloe from death would cause the storm. On the contrary, her visions throughout the week could be interpreted to suggest that the storm can be prevented by helping Chloe and solving the mystery of Rachel's disappearance. Max deduced that it was the use of her power that had caused the storm only on Friday, 5 days after her Monday rescue of Chloe in the bathroom, which set the storm in motion. You can't judge Max's actions on Monday based on things that were impossible for her to know that day, things that she only learned 5 days later. The storm was an impossible to predict consequence of a noble and good thing that Max did, saving the life of someone who she didn't even initially know was her friend Chloe. Also, players who hold Max responsible for the storm are unduly emphasizing the very last link in a long chain of events, all of which were necessary for the storm to happen, while omitting all the previous links. The storm wouldn't have happened had Jefferson not kidnapped and assaulted all those girls. The storm wouldn't have happened had Nathan not murdered Rachel. The storm wouldn't have happened had Nathan not shot Chloe. All those events were equally as necessary for the storm to come as Max rewinding time on Monday. Why is it then that Max is responsible for the storm, even though she only reacted to a chain of events set in motion by others? Why does Max's noble impulse make her responsible, but Jefferson's and Nathan's malice and cruelty do not make them responsible? But fine, let's entertain the idea that Max not only unwittingly caused the storm, but can also be held responsible for its consequences. Like I said, that's all the more reason for her not to sacrifice Chloe. If Max created the dangerous situation threatening the town, she has no moral right to kill a person uninvolved in that dangerous situation to alleviate it. If she created the danger looming over the town, she should do everything in her power to alleviate it without expanding the danger or transferring it onto others. If she's merely changing the set of people who will die as a result of her actions, then she's not really alleviating the danger. She's just redirecting it onto people who weren't originally in danger. The fact that she's created a dangerous situation gives her no moral right to endanger or kill yet more people. Think about the implications. If you have the moral right to redirect danger you yourself created onto other people, as long as that other group is less numerous than the group who were originally in danger, then that essentially gives you a license to kill. Simply create a dangerous situation for a large group that can only be alleviated by killing a smaller group, and then you're justified in killing the small group. I think we'd all agree that the person who tied up a bunch of people and placed them on the main track has no moral right to pull the lever and redirect the trolley to the side track, killing whoever might find themselves there. Why would the people on the side track be expected to pay with their lives to fix something the person pulling the lever caused? Two wrongs don't make a right. If you created a dangerous situation, you are under obligation to put an end to it. But you don't have the right, and you are most certainly not under an obligation to endanger or kill yet more people. And like I already said, the final choice is made not on Monday but on Friday, when Chloe is already safe. She is out of the dangerous situation. The fact that she was initially in danger and it was Max who saved her gives Max no moral right to push Chloe back into mortal danger. Every time I see the final choice of Life is Strange Season 1 discussed, at least one person wheels out the selfishness accusation. How supposedly it would be selfish for Max to save Chloe's life over the lives of the other dwellers of Arcadia Bay. I almost exclusively see this accusation brought up in a drive-by manner, without further elaboration, as if the selfishness of Max saving the life of her best friend was self-evident. But let's take a moment to actually analyze that bold claim. In essence, a person is selfish if they prioritize their own needs and wants to the point that they neglect or even harm others. Being selfish is the opposite of being selfless, which is characterized by prioritizing the needs and wants of others, even to the detriment of your own. I am genuinely baffled as to how saving another person's life can ever be considered selfish. If Max rewound time on Monday to save her own life, and the only way for her to stop the storm would be to undo the time she saved her own life, thus killing herself, and she refused to do so, I guess you could try to argue she was being selfish. Of course, any person trying to accuse Max of being selfish in that hypothetical scenario would need to be certain they would, in a similar predicament, gladly throw their own life away, so as not to expect from her something that they themselves wouldn't be able to do. But how can Max saving Chloe's life be selfish? Making the argument that it was selfish of Max not to sacrifice Chloe reduces Chloe from a person to an object. For the purposes of that argument, she is not treated as an independent actor, but as someone or something that only matters because of Max's interest in her, as a friend or as a romantic partner. She is treated as Max's possession that Max should part with. But Chloe is her own person, which is why I think it is ridiculous to claim that Max saving her would be selfish, because she is not Max's property. To call an action selfish necessarily carries with itself a negative moral judgment. There is no context in which that term can be used in a positive manner. When you pass a negative moral judgment, you are always invoking some standard that the action in question breached or failed to conform to. So what standard did Max break by refusing to sacrifice Chloe in order to stop the storm? Why exactly that was a selfish act on her part? Is it because she cares about Chloe more than she cares about the rest of the town? She does, and it's not debatable.
I always wanted my life to be special, an adventure. But not without you. You are my #1 priority now. You are all that matters to me.
I'll miss Chloe more than the rest of Arcadia Bay combined. It's not even close.
The first two lines are from Season 1, the third line is from Farewell. Max always says those lines, no matter what the player chooses throughout the game. Keep in mind, on the 11th of October 2013, Max had been in Arcadia Bay for less than 2 months. It was early October, she had moved back into town to attend Blackwell Academy, and the school year had started in September. She had no family or long-term friends there other than Chloe. All her classmates she'd known for 6 weeks. Chloe and Joyce were the only 2 persons in town Max had known for longer than that. Max's parents and long-term friends Kristen and Fernando remained in Seattle. So Max refusing to sacrifice Chloe's life in order to stop the storm is selfish because she cares more about her than she does about the people she would save by stopping the storm. And Max killing Chloe by pushing her back in front of the barrel of Nathan's gun is selfless, because by doing so, she sacrifices someone she cares about more to save the lives of those she cares about less. Don't you see how insane that line of reasoning is? Under this standard, the morally positive thing is to prioritize the needs, safety and well-being of people you care less about over the needs of people you care more about. Under this standard, you are selfish if you protect people you love over the people you don't love. And you are selfless if you protect the people you don't love over the people you do love. So there is an inverse relationship between how much you are emotionally attached to a person and how much you should protect and care about them. I apologize for saying something that might sound like a truism, but unfortunately, it seems that for some it isn't one. First and foremost, you owe your care, protection and devotion to the people you are emotionally attached to. That doesn't make you selfish or evil, it makes you human. Imagine there is a fire. Inside a burning building, there is your friend and another person, a stranger. You only have the time to carry out one of them to safety. Would you say that choosing to save your friend instead of the stranger from the fire was selfish? Of course not. In a situation where you can't help everyone, where you have to choose between the needs of friends and the needs of strangers, you prioritize the needs of friends. That's the essence of being someone's friend. If Max was selfish for refusing to sacrifice someone she deeply cared about to save others that she didn't care as deeply about, let's entertain a different hypothetical scenario. In this scenario, instead of Max having a lifelong friendship with Chloe and only very brief 6-week relationship with the other dwellers of Arcadia Bay, it's Max living in Arcadia Bay since she was born, uninterrupted. Kate, Warren, Alyssa, they all have been Max's friends for years. It's Chloe who moved into town recently. Max has only known her for 6 weeks. In this different world, Max is still faced with the same choice. Only this time, the person she has the option of sacrificing is not her lifelong best friend, but a recent acquaintance. And the town she has the option of saving is full of her long-term friends instead of people she only recently met for the first time. In this different world, would Max still be selfish for refusing to sacrifice Chloe? I mean, she would sacrifice people she cares more about to save a person she cares less about. Isn't this what is expected from her by those claiming she would be selfish by saving Chloe? And would sacrificing Chloe become the new selfish option because in this different world Max would do it to save people she cared more about? Isn't that what makes an action selfish? A question for those who think it would be selfish for Max to save Chloe. Imagine it's not them, but you and your own best friend in the same situation. Would you sacrifice the life of your own best friend to stop a tornado threatening a town? If you wouldn't, why do you hold Max to a standard you yourself wouldn't be able to meet? And if you would, do you realize how unhinged that sounds? Choosing to let your own best friend die for the greater good? That's something a villain would do. I'd argue that the really selfish thing for Max to do would be to sacrifice Chloe. Notice one very interesting thing. When the storm comes, at the beach, Chloe openly muses the possibility of it being Rachel's revenge upon the town.
Look at that monster! Who knows? This could be Rachel's revenge.
After dragging unconscious Max to the lighthouse, some 15 minutes later, Chloe says that everything, including the storm, had to happen for a reason, and it couldn't have been any other way.
Fuck all that, okay? You were given a power. You didn't ask for it. And you saved me. Which had to happen. All of this did. Except for what happened to Rachel. But without your power, we wouldn't have found her. Okay, so you're not the goddamn Time Master, but you're Maxine Caulfield. And you're amazing.
Notice how defiant of a look she has on her face. And then, after a few brief seconds, her defiant look gives way to a look of profound sadness, and she does a complete 180, offering her sacrifice.
Max. This is the only way. You could use that photo to change everything right back to when you took that picture. All that would take is for me to
In the span of seconds, she went from defiance and musing that perhaps the storm had to happen to coming up with a way to stop the storm at the cost of her own life. When Max pushes back against the idea, Chloe keeps arguing in favor of her own death, absolving Max from blame by saying she is simply meant to be murdered.
Fuck that! No, no way! I won't trade you! You're not trading me! Maybe you've just been delaying my real destiny. I think I should accept my fate.
Why does Chloe make this massive heel turn in such a short span of time, mere seconds? Because after saying her piece about the storm being inevitable, Chloe saw how devastated with guilt Max was. Chloe's offer to be sacrificed is in large part motivated by the desire to save Max from her guilt. Seeing how racked with guilt Max was, Chloe decided to give Max a way out. Chloe didn't want to live if the cost of her survival would be her best friend having to live with guilt.
Nobody, especially you, should have to go through that. I don't blame you for wanting me out of your life.
The selfish thing would be to accept Chloe's sacrifice. If Max sacrifices Chloe, that means she values her guilty conscience more than Chloe's life. That she doesn't want to live with guilt more than she wants to live with Chloe. If you think that I'm exaggerating Chloe's devotion to Max, then remember that Chloe's last words are always that she loves Max. If you overdose her in episode 4, or if you sacrifice her in episode 5, just before she dies, she always says she loves Max, regardless of players' choices throughout the game. If your last words, no matter the timeline, are always to profess love for someone, I think it's fair to say you genuinely and deeply care about that person.
Don't forget about me.
Don't you forget about me.
I love you, Max.
I'll always love you.
One final thing to discuss is that supposedly Chloe wanted to be sacrificed and Max would go against her wishes by refusing to do so. Before we begin analyzing that aspect of the problem, I need to stress one important thing. The final choice is for Max, not Chloe, to make. Delegating this choice to Chloe makes no sense because it is Max who is faced with the dilemma to swing the headman's axe or to refuse to do so. I noticed that some fans complain about Max being a bland character. This couldn't be farther from the truth. Max Caulfield is a very unusual protagonist for a choice-based game because she is anything but a blank slate that the player can fill with their own ideas. When you listen to what Max has to say, especially when you take into account her internal monologues and the contents of her diary, it becomes evident that she has very strong emotions and opinions about a great many things, regardless of what the player chooses for her throughout the game. This unfounded opinion about Max's supposed lack of character leads some to relegate the final choice to Chloe's judgment. Others argue that Chloe's death would complete her character arc, which is why sacrificing her makes more narrative sense. Like I said, it is Max who is handed the headman's axe, so it doesn't matter that it's Chloe's head on the chopping block. The decision is ultimately Max's. And I think that Max is such a strong and expressive character that it's easy to deduce what she would do if it was up to her, not the player, to choose. I will discuss this more in the third video. As for Death supposedly completing Chloe's character arc, in general, I think it's impossible for Death to complete anything. Sure, Death puts an end to everything, but in the least satisfying way possible. It completes nothing and leaves everything incomplete. And I think it's an unbelievably puritanical and unfair judgment to say that Chloe deserves the death penalty for being a troubled teen. And if she deserves to be murdered for her supposed misdeeds, then what punishment you would devise in your bloodthirst for Jefferson, Nathan, Frank, or Victoria, all of whom willingly hurt and exploited others, being drawn and quartered? Don't you see how unfair it is to demand from Chloe redemption by death in a story full of other characters who are genuinely cruel and malicious? Don't you think it would be a much more fitting way to end Chloe's story if the girl who was given up on by everyone, who by the end gave up on herself, was chosen by someone for a change? Ultimately, it is of secondary relevance how the ending fits with Chloe's character arc, because she is not the main character. Sure, she is important to the plot, and her relationship with Max is one of the main axes of the story, but it is Max who is the main character. So if anything, we should be analyzing which ending would fit Max's character arc better. I'm going to talk more about the ending through the lens of Max's character development in the second video. But for now, I don't think I'm going to surprise anyone when I say that obviously the ending in which the main character learns to live with the consequences of her actions and starts moving forward in time is proof of more character development than the ending in which the main character is so crippled with self-doubt that she has to go back in time and erase every single thing she did throughout the game, thus rendering all her choices and struggles moot, taking her back to ground zero not only in the emotional but even in the physical sense. Having said all that, let's analyze the Chloe wanted Max to kill her argument. Firstly, nobody, including your friends, can demand from you that you kill them. Certain values are so precious that you can't renounce them, even if for some reason you'd want to. For example, you can't sell yourself into slavery. Even if you'd willingly do so, the person who enslaved you would be a criminal. Likewise, even if you asked someone to kill you and they'd grant your wish, they'd still answer for it. The fact that you asked them to do so might be regarded as an extenuating circumstance when determining their punishment, but they'd be found guilty and punished nonetheless. Secondly, Chloe doesn't demand from Max that she kill her. She only places that choice before her.
No matter what you choose, I know you'll make the right decision.
She is not angry if Max refuses to do so, as is evident from the ending cutscene where they both leave town together. Their photograph in Season 2 is proof that they are still friends 4 years after the storm. I also don't understand the argument brought up by some that Chloe would be angry at Max for Joyce's death. Do you think Joyce would want to survive at the cost of Chloe's life? What kind of a parent would want to survive at the cost of their child's life? I think it's obvious that Joyce would have wanted for Max to save her daughter's life.
Oh, Max, you're Chloe's best friend for a reason. You're here exactly when she needs you.
And finally, I don't think a teenager on strong prescription antidepressants, who most likely had suicidal thoughts in the past, who's had extremely low self-esteem for years.
He acts like I'm some kind of problem to solve. Sometimes I am a problem, though.
Because I don't want to ruin this the way I ruin everything else in my life.
And I screwed it up somehow. Like I screw everything up, because I'm a fucking screw-up.
I know I've been selfish, but for once, I think I should accept my fate. You prove that over and over again, even though I don't deserve it. I'm so selfish. There's so many more people in Arcadia Bay who should live. Way more than me. Don't say that.
Who has been told over and over again that she is broken, a problem, and that nobody would miss her until she finally internalized it.
For your own good, you should stay away from Chloe. She's a loser, and she'll only drag you down.
I know exactly what kind of person you are from the moment I saw you.
What kind of person is
A
that?
delinquent. A broken girl from a broken home.
You don't have any friends.
Nobody would ever even miss your punk ass, would they?
Can make an informed and conscious decision to die. When you hear someone say they don't deserve love and friendship, that they don't even deserve to live, you get them help, not exploit their mental state to turn them into a human sacrifice for the angry weather gods. I think that on the 11th of October 2013, Chloe was in a very bad place emotionally, and when she saw that her death could spare Max from feeling guilty, she became resigned to her fate. The mistaken belief that only in death her life could have meaning by saving Max from guilt pushed her over the edge. It would be supremely wrong to accept the sacrifice of someone going through a crisis like that, especially since Season 2 established that her crisis was overcome, and as of 2017 she's living her life happy and safe, sharing that life with Max and having been reconciled with her stepfather David. I started the video by mentioning that a slightly higher percentage of players chose to sacrifice Chloe, which, as I argued throughout this video, is from my point of view the wrong choice. But to tell you the truth, I'm feeling quite optimistic about the 48% figure, because 48% of players were still able to choose right, even though almost everything in episode 5 is designed to sway you into sacrificing Chloe. The entire nightmare sequence is designed to guilt trip Max, and by extension the player, into sacrificing Chloe. Every single character she encounters in the nightmare tries to make Max doubt her choices and her friendship with Chloe. The nightmare versions of all the characters Max meets in the diner try to guilt trip her into sacrificing Chloe by falsely accusing Max of intentionally destroying the town. And then, at the lighthouse, Chloe not only comes up with the idea to sacrifice her, but she keeps arguing in favor of it even after Max does what any friend would do: react with shock at the very suggestion. Given all that, I'm amazed that 48% of players were able to see clearly. I think it's mostly a testament to how likable of a character Chloe Price is. Some players relate to her, others feel protective of her. Yes, I know she's gained a dedicated and vocal following of haters over the years, but it's the internet. You'd find haters for everyone and everything here. It's interesting that initially the ending of episode 5 was supposed to be more balanced. For example, during her nightmare, Max would encounter William's ghost, who of course would try to persuade her to save his daughter's life. And right before the final choice, instead of pleading to be slaughtered like a sacrificial lamb, Chloe would tell Max that being with her was her destiny too.
This is your destiny too, Max. And I'm not leaving you. I'll always be at your side, like you've always been there for me.
Just like Max herself succinctly pointed out in episode 4, how can there even be such a thing as destiny for her?
Now Max Caulfield exists in 2 or maybe 3 different realities. How can I have a destiny?
Destiny is what you choose it to be, and I'm certain that if the developers went with their initial idea and made the ending of episode 5 more balanced, instead of stacking the deck to guilt trip Max into sacrificing Chloe, even more players would have chosen the right thing to do, sticking by a friend in their hour of need instead of sheepishly submitting to sadistic fate.